podcast. This is episode 17. It is Christmas Day, so happy holidays to everyone. Today, we're going to be talking a little bit about leverage and essentially working smarter instead of harder. But in this case, in Founding Without Funding, we always talk about working smarter and harder. And the thing is, I think that a lot of us as entrepreneurs and founders, we do work hard, but I think sometimes we're not working smart enough. Sometimes we are, kind of getting caught up in the day to day, and we're not leveraging our work with the tools and also even the staff that we have. I find that a lot of entrepreneurs and founders, even myself, we're not properly using either the tools that we have or the manpower, so to say, the staff that we have that is perfectly capable of executing things that can, multiply the efforts of our work. But a lot of the times we don't take the time to train and properly set up a staff member that's perfectly capable of helping us reach that next level. So we're going to touch on that a little bit today. So, what does leverage actually mean? So, we're talking about being able to work less, right? And essentially, receive the same outcome so that if we work more, we receive even more of an outcome. So, um, you know, at the end of the day, very important to use everything at our disposal. Now, the number one thing that I talk about, which is what most people talk about right now going into 2026, is using AI effectively. That is huge leverage. I've talked about it before. There was a study that a manager that's proficient at using AI can get the same amount of work done as a manager and a staff of 20 people that are not using AI. So, very important to use AI to leverage our efforts. Now, some people say, well, AI doesn't really do exactly what I want it to do, and I don't trust it, or, whatever it is. Remember, you're typically going to use it as a starting point, as a jumping off point. You can have it make training manuals for you, or business plans, or step by step things, but it's just a starting point, and it's going to save you hours of time putting out that basic outline. So remember, when you're using AI, whether you're using it for graphics or using it to put together paperwork or using it to manage your social media, whatever it is, you're always going to check it, but you're using it as a starting off point. And ask it questions, whether you're using GPT or whatever it is you're using. Ask AI questions, ask it to build you things, ask it, how do you compare this to the market? Because remember, we don't necessarily need Chat GPT's opinion on something. It knows the opinion and the competition in the marketplace, right? So its opinion it's giving us is based on, what companies are working, what's not working, what these companies' procedures are, which are the top companies. So it's giving you, factual information, and you're going to take that and build off of it. So I think the number one thing that people tend to not utilize AI enough for is to just get that basic outline. Even if you're saying, no, I want to do this myself, I don't want it to be AI, I want it to be custom, and I want to do it, get that basic outline done, because that's going to take hours away from the work you have to do, and that's going to leverage your time. You know, Again, I think most entrepreneurs, we do work hard, especially if you're a successful entrepreneur, if you have a running business, even if it's not a successful business, but if you're actually running a business, especially when you have payroll and all this stuff, we're typically working very hard, but we're not necessarily leveraging our efforts. So AI is the first way we need to be thinking about that nowadays. And then the second one is staff. So many entrepreneurs or small business owners have great staff that's perfectly capable of doing a lot of the things that we're doing ourselves. But what we don't do as entrepreneurs a lot of the time is take the time out to put together the training documentation and sit down and train them on how to do these things. You can't expect somebody to just take over and without any training documentation, without any videos to reference or paperwork to reference, without any training of you going through it with them over and over, you can't expect them to just magically start doing things. And sometimes we don't take the time to train them, but also sometimes as founders and small business owners, we think that they can't do it and that it has to be us to do this. And we have to let go of that. One of the books that I love that definitely changed my business outlook is Build a Business, Not a Job. I've talked about that book before. And one of the key elements is that you have to give up some control in order to actually scale, and also in order to actually be an entrepreneur and a business owner, as opposed to just working at a job within your company. Because when you hold on to all of these things thinking that you're the only one who can do it, that is going to hinder you, and that's going to make it so that you just have a job within your company. You're just a worker for your company. Yes, you happen to own the company, but you are stuck inside that company with a job. So, as entrepreneurs, that next level after we get going, get some income coming in, we got some staff on board, that's when we need to start letting go a little bit. And we need to start training other people on how to do some of those things that we were doing so that we can leverage our efforts and leverage our time. So, big shift there. When I had read that book, Build a Business, Not a Job, this was at a time where I was shifting or wanting to shift into the real estate business from the business that we were in previously. And so this book made a huge difference, the Build a Business, Not a Job book, because I read it at the exact right time. And it allowed me to actually train people at the current company over and over until they had it, and give them things that we didn't necessarily feel comfortable with giving to them at first, the certain responsibilities. But when you look at the whole of where you're trying to go as a company, you can let go of some of those things. Excuse me. Especially nowadays when there's so much technology to track people, to train people, there's a lot of things that you could let go of, that you could delegate, that you may think, oh, I can be the only one to do this, but there's a lot of things that you can delegate. And so I would recommend to, again, this is difficult because most small business owners don't necessarily have the time or the willpower to stop everything and say, okay, instead of just getting through today and doing whatever it takes to get to the next day, I'm going to set time aside to create an outline of what I can delegate out to other people, and then I'm going to actually create the documentation on training them. And this is probably documents as well as probably videos, depending on what you're doing, so that they can always reference them. And then you're going to spend the time actually training them. So if you want to grow out of that, and this especially hits people like when I was at this point, when you're kind of stuck at that 1 to 2 million a year, right? That's where we were at when we shifted into real estate. When I read that book, we were doing about 2 million a year, but we were stuck there. And the reason why we were stuck there was because we weren't delegating enough, and we weren't leveraging our efforts and using our staff, because we had perfectly capable staff, but we just didn't want to let go and delegate some of the things that we needed. But in order for you to go from a $2 million company like we were to a 4 or 5, $10 million company, there's just no doubt about it. You're going to have to let go of some control. You're going to have to delegate, and you're going to have to train properly and have the proper training documentation. Now, this is where AI comes back into the picture. If you're using AI proficiently, a lot of these trainings and documentation can be outlined at least by AI, whether it's GPT or whatever you're using, and it's going to save you a ton of time. Keep in mind that the AI knows, typically you're going to be in a business that there's already a lot of information out there, right? Unless you're totally changing the world with a brand new product or service, AI is going to know whatever product or service you're bringing to the marketplace. It's going to know all the back end of it, all the stats of it, who's doing it, what are the biggest companies, all that kind of good stuff. And so it can make you a perfectly good outline for what you're trying to train people. You say, I'm trying to train my sales staff to do XYZ at this type of company, put together a training manual for them. And that's going to save you hours of time. And then you're going to obviously read it, edit it. And so just remember, it's just a starting off point. But let me tell you, when I was doing this with that company that was doing 2 million a year and we were trying to take it to the next level, I really wish that I had AI to get that initial outline, because it took dozens of hours to put that all together from scratch, all the training manuals, all the training videos. So I wish that I had that technology, at my fingertips, because it's going to save a massive amount of time. So leverage yourself with the AI and use the AI to help you leverage yourself with your staff members and be able to let go a little bit and delegate so that you can take things to the next level. Because for those of you that are watching, you probably are feeling that same thing. It's something very common for a business to kind of hit that ceiling at 1 million to 2 million a year. And it's really hard to take it to that next level, because that next level typically requires a good amount of delegation and a good amount of training for other people in order to be able to leverage your time and efforts and expand your business. So let's talk about here, why do founders have so many issues with this? Small business owners, entrepreneurs, founders, why do we have such trouble setting aside the time to make this all happen so that we can leverage our efforts, right? Because we have to set aside the time first, and then everything from there on will be leverage. And we're getting twice, 3 times the amount of work out of every hour that we're putting in. I think the biggest reason why we don't do that, and again, I'm guilty of this earlier in my career, I think the biggest reason is that we're caught in the day to day. We're just trying to get through the next day. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that only we can do certain things. So that's where the delegation really comes in. You've got to take that extra time to put together the training and documentation and let go of some things, to have, some things to delegate to people, because that's usually why we get caught up in the day to day so much, because we're putting out fires that only we can put out. But if we were to actually leverage our efforts by training our staff on how to do those things, letting go of a little bit of control so that it can be done, if that's the case, other people can put out those fires. There's typically not a lot of fires that only we can put out as the owner, as the founder, as the entrepreneur that's running the business. There's some at a very high level that are never going to be able to be done by a staff member, but members of your team can put out a lot more fires than you think, because not only are they capable of it, but also you're capable of training them how to do it and having the proper documentation. So don't be afraid to let go a little bit. Don't, not train the people by thinking, oh, I have to do everything. Because when you feel like you have to do everything, again, you're running around putting out fires all day where you're saying, oh my gosh, I'm the only one that they can talk to about this, and I have to do this. And, it just becomes, you're just trying to get through the day. And when you're just trying to get through the day and get to the other side, and you're exhausted at the end of the day, you've done everything you possibly can, it's hard to then set aside more time to carve out, to make those trainings, to delegate those things that you need to delegate, and to train the people on how to actually accomplish that. So I think the biggest problem, and again, I'm guilty of it in the past, is just trying to get through the day because you haven't delegated anything yet. And so you're the only one who can do all these things. We've got to let go. And it's very hard, especially if it's a business you've been working on for a long time. If it's your baby, it's precious to you. It's not easy to let go of some of that control, to have that kind of trust. But you have to know that if you can't delegate those tasks successfully, and you can't trust someone else to do this, then it's never going to grow, and your business is going to be capped where it's at. So it's really a decision you have to make is, okay, do I feel a little bit uncomfortable, get out of my comfort zone by doing these trainings and delegating and giving up some control and grow the business? Or do I stay exactly where I am, where not only is the business not going to grow, but the business is going to continue to eat up your life and all of your time. And in order to change that, we need to leverage our efforts, leverage our time. And to do that, it's typically going to be either using AI or using team members that are properly trained with documentation on that training so that they have the power to accomplish those goals, which fit into the company's goals, which fits into your goals. So let's talk a little bit about founders and entrepreneurs, and sometimes we want to reinvent the wheel a little bit too much. Now, excuse me, it's okay to reinvent the wheel and do something very out there. And it's okay to have different company culture and all that. But as far as the business organization, I would say that you typically kind of stick true to traditional things. And that's why you can definitely use AI to help you with these processes and procedures, because you're typically, in order to build a successful company, especially in order to delegate tasks and to leverage your time and to hire and train staff, that's typically going to be the same whether it was 20 years ago, 50 years ago, or now. Obviously, things are changing with AI a lot now, where you can accomplish a lot of people's jobs yourself with AI. But the fact is, to build a company is basically the same building blocks of staff, delegation, training, HR, being able to manage people, and having all of that fit, all of those puzzle pieces fit together. It's never really going to change. And so, having a different company culture is great. Having a different product or service is great. But don't turn your back on the traditional ways to build a company, because building a company with help with staff members, being able to delegate things, it's always going to pretty much be the same. So use AI, use the books and courses and podcasts that are out there that talk about these things, because you're probably not going to reinvent the way business is necessarily done, especially when it comes to people and training them and hiring them. And as most of us know, people are usually the hardest part about running a business, because everybody is different. People have different goals and motivations. At the end of the day, it's difficult to manage all that. All right. What we'll do is I'm going to go ahead and take some questions here. So the first question is from Kevin. So Kevin is asking, I feel like I'm working nonstop, but my income barely moves. Is that a leverage part of the grind, a leverage issue, or just part of the grind? So Kevin's asking, I feel like I'm working nonstop, but my income barely moves. Is that a leverage issue or just part of the grind? Well, that depends on exactly what's going on in your situation. But I think the example that I gave of when we went from that $2 million ceiling to reading that book, Build a Business, Not a Job, and being able to delegate some, which allowed us the time to go into a whole different industry, the real estate industry, and be able to, own a national mortgage lender and a Florida real estate brokerage and doing all the real estate investing that we were doing and all that kind of stuff. It wouldn't have happened if we didn't read that book. But I felt exactly like you there, Kevin, before we were delegating those tasks. It feels like we're working nonstop. We're doing everything we possibly can, but we can't get past that 2 million a year ceiling. And so we needed to make a change. And so I would say, if you are at that point where you feel like you're just working 24/7 and you can't, get past that ceiling that you're at, I would say you should look at your processes, your procedures, your staff, and the way you're training everybody so that you can properly leverage your time and your efforts. Okay, question here from Maria. How do you tell if something will scale or if it's always going to be tied to your time? So, how do you figure out if something will scale or if it's always going to be tied to your time? I think the way to do that is to make sure that what you're doing is repeatable. I think one of the biggest reasons why people can't scale is that they don't have enough profit margin. Because remember, to scale, we're typically going to be dumping a lot of money into ads and marketing. Once you get that product or service selling, the key is to use the feedback and narrow in those processes and procedures to raise that profit margin enough to where you can dump a lot of money into marketing and advertising. So, for example, if your business is doing a million a year because you get a lot of referrals and you're just on the day to day grind, that's great. And you're not doing much advertising. So, your profit margin might be fine for you. But if you want to scale that up to 2, 3, 4, 5, 10 million a year, it's going to have to be something that scales with ad money involved, whether that's online ads or marketing or whatever it is. You have to have enough profit margin to also include that advertising and marketing because there's no way to scale without that. So I think it's very important before you focus on scaling, once you have that product or service that people are purchasing, you need to then improve and streamline the process, the product, and raise those profit margins enough to where you say, okay, if it costs us $5 to get a customer that we don't know by putting ads out there, we need to have that $5 built into the profit margin. A lot of people try to scale without doing that. And that's the problem. Then you're just dumping money into ads, dumping money into marketing, and it's not working out because your profit margin doesn't have that built in. So now, you might be doing 5 million a year, but you might run out of ad money, that year because it's not actually coming back. So to see if something's scalable, obviously you're going to need some type of ads or marketing. But before you do that, I highly recommend you take whatever product or service you have and you dissect it and see where you can cut costs and where you can raise margins and streamline the process so that it takes less, man hours to do. It has a higher profit margin. And then you can say, yeah, this is perfect. We have $5 per sale to spend on marketing. And it looks like that's about the cost of, customer acquisition. And so now you can scale to infinity. That's what's great about today's business. So if you leverage your time, leverage AI, leverage training so that you can leverage your staff's time, you will be a much more effective entrepreneur and business owner. And then you will be able to scale up and break that ceiling of wherever you're at. So with that being said, we will go ahead and wrap it up. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. We will see you tomorrow on the Founding Without Funding